The first official team has been announced for the Call of Duty franchise season, that being good old New York. They began their rapid amount of announcements, starting with Zuma and Temp, which we covered just a few days ago here on the Dispatch. But alongside Zuma and Temp, they've also signed Accuracy, Zero attached to round out their starting lineup. And they've also got Revan as their coach and JP as their analyst. So that now gives us the opportunity to look at this team and give some input into the thoughts around these five with each other. And instantly, whenever I saw that these guys were kind of being announced, and obviously in the rumor mill, this team was kind of rumored a little bit in terms of whether or not they would be on the same lineup, if they would be in New York together. So I've had a few opportunities to kind of think about this team, and now that it was announced, I had the opportunity to think what I did originally, which was chemistry. And a lot of people may be thinking, chemistry? Really? Like with this group, you're thinking chemistry? I absolutely am, because there are previous kind of chemistry lines that are existing in this starting lineup. The first by far and the most apparent, which everyone probably instantly, as soon as I said chemistry, thought of these two, Attach and Zuma, right? The duo throughout 5 different Call of Duty titles play with each other. They've attended 30-plus major events together and have also won together 4 major championships, all under the FaZe brand. These guys go way back to where they were considered to be aspiring talent. They were the young guns on that FaZe lineup in Advanced Warfare, right? And unfortunately had to split apart in Black Ops 4 this season when FaZe originally did not qualify for the CWL Pro League. And obviously at that time, that's when Attach went off to EG while Zuma stayed on FaZe Clan. And during that time, Zuma, in fact, ended up teaming with Zero, who also is going to be on this team as well, right? He brings on Zero and Scraps, which leads to a very exciting time for the FaZe franchise, or for the FaZe team, excuse me. They finished 4th at Anaheim. They finished 3rd at the Pro League playoffs. So obviously there's a decent history there, and the fact that they want to kind of carry on their relationship should be a good sign for those who are fans of this team and who are really kind of looking in depth at this roster together as well. Next, right, we've got Temp. They bring in Temp. He obviously has a history with Accuracy, as they started off the year under Splice in Black Ops 4, a team that I thought couldn't really coexist well together, but they managed to hold on for a while. Like I said, I absolutely give them that. So much so that they were looking like the most consistent team after the first 2 events, right? Finishing 3rd at CWL Vegas and finishing 2nd at CWL Fort Worth. And obviously Accuracy later on went to the bench for Splice. We just, we'll throw that one out the window after Splice ended up finishing top 12 at London. And during that time, Accuracy, we got so many different lines of communication. It's crazy, right? During that time, Accuracy went to Evil Geniuses, where he joined up with who? Attach, where they would finish off the year alongside each other, placing top 8 at Champs. Now, for those that know the COD scene a little bit more in depth, you'll know that even out of the game, Accuracy and Attach have had a very long friendship together, where they've gone back even kind of toward the local scene. They've basically been friends for a very long time and happen to be teammates, toward the end of this season in Black Ops 4 under Evil Geniuses. So why am I talking about chemistry so much? Let's just kind of get this out of the way, because I've made a lot of tweets about chemistry in relation to how players have worked together. Even in a few videos that I've talked about with rumored or even solidified teams, people keep asking me, Landon, why are we talking about chemistry? Why is this important? For me, that is one of the most important parts about a franchise, especially considering the Goliaths that exist out there right now, or at least that are rumored, right? We talk about our Chicagos, we talk about our LA teams, we talk about Atlanta. I mean, the rumored rosters that are out there, it's hard to contend with them. I mean, you want to put 5 players on a piece of paper, it's not going to be easy to pick your squad over there. So what do you do in that case? You look for connections, and you look for chemistry, because if you build the team around chemistry, it's not only, like I said, for me, the whole idea around franchising is not necessarily always about just putting a group of 5 guys who are unbelievably talented together and just hope that it works, because sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have to add in a few extra pieces to make sure that everything is mended correctly. Because the biggest important, or rather for me, the biggest importance about this is that franchising is not just a title or a month-long investment, right? It is a decade-plus long investment, meaning that there is a very good chance that a lot of these players who are out there right now and being signed to different organizations won't be moving from these franchise teams for years. That's an S at the end of that. Not just a year, years, right? So making sure that you've got a group of guys who not only want to play with one another, but will work together and for a long haul is everything, right? That is, for me, the most important thing about all rosters and how they work long term. I mean, even just very quickly, as I want to brief over this, we even talk about the Optic Gaming dynasty, right? The biggest issue that they suffered was that they were winning title after title after title. Obviously, they had the biggest storyline of winning champs, but even throughout all of their success, they had internal struggles. So much so that there were times where they didn't even want to play alongside each other. So you talk about a team that was at the absolute pinnacle of Call of Duty, being labeled as the best team throughout multiple titles, and still yet they had issues with one another. And that's, for me, the biggest thing with franchising, is that you have to have a group of guys that have got chemistry. And I'm not talking about friendships. I'm talking about the ability to want to play alongside each other and that can work together. That's the reason why I've been so heavily based on the chemistry talk when it comes down to these lineups, is not only just because you've got the Goliaths that exist on the other side, but also because you want to have something stable for the future. You don't want to be looking at multiple roster changes, because if so, you could be somewhat labeled into those. Franchising is now going to start working like professional sports, and not incredibly often are you making the amount of changes that Call of Duty has had in its history of constantly swapping out every few months starting players. Doesn't happen all that often, especially when you look at, like I said, other franchise sports. So let's move on, right? Like I've said, New York, I think they've got the experience, and I think that they've got a lot of consistent pieces too, which I think is key. We kind of talk on, especially a slower paced game. That's where I think, right, accuracy thrived. He's one of the slower paced ARs who I think could enter into a World War II-like feeling, right? When he was under that TK team, he was regarded as one of the best, Mr. Iceman, right? Everyone remembers those times. So I think that somewhat similar to a few other roster changes that are currently going on, it seems as if a lot of teams that are confirmed are kind of following under the same kind of blueprint, where they're looking at their main ARs, and it's kind of about the slower paced, right? They're absolutely kind of banking on a slower paced type style. We talk about Minnesota with Assault. We talk about London with Raided, right? Kind of going back to a group of guys who are very, very good at slower paced games. And if that were to work out the same way that World War II has or did in Modern Warfare, they could be set up very well. So that's kind of one thing that I find very interesting about this team, is not only is that accuracy is obviously a great player, but if he can enter into that World War II form, that's where a lot of more talk may be spread around this New York team. Like I said, I like the pieces that they have. My only issue, or maybe my biggest issue, I think, with the team are the possible internal conflicts. That is, for me, always going to be a piece that you have to think about. And like I said, I think the consistency of this group is great, and I think you have some questions in terms of, will this player be up to par? I think you have a few questions for the most part, but you're confident if you're a New York fan. Regardless of that, though, and all the consistency of all the things that I've talked about, you have some incredibly talented players, and one of those being Timp, right? The start of Black Ops 4, without question, a top 3 player in the world. Due to Splice's later play, it started to kind of trickle off a tad bit, but everyone knows the skill set that he possesses, but they also realize his attitude toward teams. Whenever he made his comeback to Call of Duty Esports, right, toward the end of Infinite Warfare, he instantly had issues, and it's been talked about later how he had some conflicts with Dashy, right? Under Straight Rippin instantly joins the scene. We talk about conflicts with New York. This is where I'm kind of looking at it from. So Tim's kind of history, right? Enters into IW champs, or rather the end of IW, plays champs under Straight Rippin. One major kind of outlying issue, as he said, had issues with Dashy. Joined the NV team, right, at the start of the year, or the next season. Started the NV team when the organization pretty much gave Slasher the keys. Despite having a great champs placement, they said, you lead us. He picked up his old team, right? The MLG World Finals lineup, picked up that group. And I'll be honest, it probably wasn't Tim's fault that ended up occurring, but I don't think it was necessarily the greatest contribution. So the roster didn't perform well, so Slasher left. And I don't put that on Temp, like I said, necessarily. Then he later goes on to join Echo Fox, where there was a decent amount of role problems. The team was incredibly inconsistent, and I think finished top 24 at champs. Later down the line, we see him enter Splice. They start off well, some big personalities on the team. Players get benched and subs were brought in. It seems to be following in a similar cycle where you talk about maybe some inconsistency, but in general, everyone knows the talent that he has. But on roster after roster after roster, there is always a little bit of something that occurs. There's always some bit of problems that begin to happen whenever he is in a certain team. And like I said, it could just be a matter of just not the right fit, maybe players around him, which I think is so important. This is what I've been saying even in the prior video when I talked about just solely Zuma and Temp being added to New York. I hope that they put pieces around him to make sure that there cannot be internal conflicts, that everything can be smooth sailing. That for me is huge. And I think that for me will decide a lot on what happens with this New York roster. Like I like Temp, and I think he has incredible skill, but you can't outlie what has actually occurred. I went through the list, and those are all indirect storylines that have happened. But all in all, right, we look at this New York team, like I said, kind of getting back to that. All in all, a great core. I think a lot of potential exists with this team. I think you do have a few questions, but this is a roster that I think could really surprise people, despite, how maybe Reddit or Twitter have worked. It's kind of like either people really like this team or they're kind of a little bit, toward this team. Like I said, I do worry about kind of inconsistency long-term and possible future internal problems, but if you got the right pieces put on, and I think if you do have the right kind of key moments for this team to succeed, I think that New York will be set up quite nicely. I really do. I think they have a great core. I think they have a lot of things to work on with, but like I said, for me, the consistency of this lineup and the future of ignoring the internal problems, if you can get through that, I think you've got a very, very good future set up. But like we've talked about, franchising, it is a decade-long investment, meaning that they intend on players being here for a while, not a short time. Roster changes, they're a lot more difficult to make happen, especially this year with prices and how franchising and how multiple teams are dealing different deals and how one team kind of debates on what a player's worth is in comparison to another. There's a lot out there, and teams definitely want to try to stick with their team for as long as they possibly can. So if roster changes are in the future, I see issues. But if they handle it right, I think that New York, like I said, could be an absolute top team.